Hello and welcome to the World Bank Group and IMF Spring Meetings here in Washington, D.C. As we draw to a close, today I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Rush Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief at DEVEX. Welcome, Rush.
Thanks, Andrea. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. So today, I want to talk about what's been happening inside, but also outside of this building during this very eventful week. So as you might recall, during last year's annual meetings in Marrakesh, a new vision was laid out for the bank. This year's spring meetings were centered around the theme from vision to impact, with a strong emphasis on going from vision to action. So I'm curious to know, what are your takeaways and how did you see this play out this week?
Well, first of all, I've been coming to a lot of spring meetings for a lot of years. I think there's more attention than ever on the World Bank, in part because now it's at the center of both the development agenda and the climate action agenda. And that's something new that came out of Marrakesh. So I think there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of focus, and people are looking at the different levels and layers of what the World Bank has been doing since Marrakesh. I think there has been real progress. I talk to a lot of people and get different perspectives. So some are advocates who say it's not going as fast as it should. Some are others who say, look, these reforms, they might seem internal, but they are really significant. They're going to change the culture and the DNA of this institution. So I've never seen as much debate and conversation, not pessimism, but a sense that the bank is more needed than it ever was before. And that actually its leadership, it's not about just what the bank does, but it's about aligning all of the other MDBs and the DFIs, really the whole global development finance architecture, toward addressing the dual challenges of development and climate.
So speaking of change and transformation, I know you've been following the World Bank's reform process since the G20 made its call for MDB reform 2 years ago. I'm curious to know, what are your observations when it comes to how far the institution has come in its process of becoming a better bank? And how are external stakeholders now talking about and engaging with this process?
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of interest. So there's actually a lot of engagement, and that includes the private sector, both investors and corporates, and includes the philanthropy sector. Lots of organizations are looking at what is our World Bank engagement strategy, because they see the platform is now much more relevant across so many more issues. I think the reforms have actually made quite a bit of progress. If you look at some of the announcements that were even just made today around new ways of innovative finance, of so-called sweating the balance sheet, right? Using instruments that have always existed at the bank, like guarantees, but taking them to a new level. And that's what's really different. It's not just that the bank is trying to be better in the sense of more efficient. That's there too. I know President Banga has worked a lot on reducing the time frame to get a project going. But also it's about the entire sector shifting. When you think about something like electrification in Africa, which is one of the other big announcements this week, that is not just simply a money problem. That's a policy problem. That's aligning utilities, investors, corporates, governments, international organizations like the World Bank, but not just the World Bank. So it's that alignment that is really at stake here. It's not just about reforming this institution internally. And I think if you look at the narrative and the conversation coming out of these spring meetings, that's an important marker. We had most of the MDB presidents were here. Lots of insurance leaders, investment leaders from pension funds and investment banks, corporate leaders were here in Washington, some inside this room and some at many other events held by other organizations around town. And there's a reason for that interest, which is this reform agenda is not just about the bank. It's about actually achieving the Paris goals and the SDGs.
So as you mentioned, a big part of becoming a better bank has to do with also being better positioned to serve the countries that need it the most and to work together to ensure that that happens. With the spring meetings now wrapping up, our attention will pivot toward the IDA21 Replenishment in December. And as you know, half of the world's 75 most vulnerable countries are facing a widening income gap with the wealthiest economies for the first time this century. I would like to know, where do you think we should be placing our energy to ensure IDA is most effective in addressing this gap, but also supporting countries in the process of achieving their sustainable development goals?
Yeah, I think IDA is essential. It is concessional money, right? It's cheaper money. And one of the things we learned this week was that the volume of funding coming from low and middle income countries back to wealthy countries is actually comparable to the amount of aid going to those countries. And that's because of all of the debt that has been accumulated over the years, some at high interest rates, that has to be paid back. IDA is different in the sense it's highly concessional. It's cheaper money. And so for countries that are really stretched, which is a lot of countries at the low income scale in the world, IDA is essential. And it's essential across issues. It could be health, it could be energy, as we talked about. Those are two of the big announcements this week. IDA is sort of key. It's hard to see a way that a country gets out onto a growth path that's more inclusive without IDA. Now, what should they actually do? How do they close those gaps? I think the health announcement this week was interesting, which is really looking at how do you take some of the changes in technology and innovation and bring them to the places that need them most. So in most countries in lower income, there's just nowhere near enough of a health workforce. You're not going to very quickly or magically train enough nurses and doctors to serve the needs that are there. But telemedicine provides a lot of opportunity. And it's a kind of issue, just like electrification, where it's not just we need this one widget or this one technology. You need to align all of these actors. And that's what the World Bank is so good at doing with IDA money. IDA money being a key ingredient there. And the bank made this big visionary announcement. They want to reach 1.5 billion people with healthcare services. It's a big, bold announcement. It's one of those things that we, of course, track a lot at DevX to see how is it actually going to work between now and 2030. But there's no way it gets there without IDA.
Yes, all great announcements and a lot of progress to be made. I'm very excited to hear all your thoughts today. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to everyone for tuning in.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Andrea.